It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Pires coming to you from Baltimore. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson visits Ankara this week. It is an opportunity here for us to talk about new developments in Turkey. The referendum to consolidate presidential powers is being executed in the next couple of weeks, as well as there's been rising tensions with several European countries. On to talk about all of this with me is Baris Karaagac. Baris is Professor of International Development Studies at Trent University in Ontario. He's also the editor of the book Accumulations, Crises and Struggles, Capital and Labor in Temporary Capitalism. Thank you so much for joining us, Baris.
Thanks for having me, Sharmini.
So, Baris, in the past, we've discussed the consolidation of powers that Erdogan has been seeking for a very long time now. Now the referendum has been set and he's about to execute it, not only in Turkey, but throughout the world. Tell us more about it.
This is the most significant development in Turkey. There will be a referendum held on April 16th on 18 proposed amendments to the Constitution. The significance of these amendments is that they are going to replace the existing parliamentary system with an executive presidential system. Many critics and the opposition have argued that this will further centralize power that Erdogan has been using for some time, enjoying for some time, and it will be actually the end of the regime that we have seen in the past 85 years in Turkey. And there's a significant concern, both in the world, but particularly in the European Union, and also in Turkey. And I agree with the concerns and worries of these people, especially given how these amendments will increase even further the power Erdogan has been using in the past 3 to 4 years.
Give us some examples of the kind of power that he's exercising, which will now be consolidated if he actually wins this referendum.
There won't be a prime minister. That position is abolished if there's a yes vote on the referendum. If the president wishes, there won't be even a cabinet, and he will decide how many vice presidents he needs, how many ministers or secretaries he will need, and these will be all his calls, and he will be able to appoint a significant number of the board of judges and prosecutors who have a board, an institution that has a disciplinary power over the judiciary system. As a result of these amendments, he will be able to increase his power significantly, and there will be little supervision over how he wields this power, new power. So many people who have been observing what is happening, unfolding in Turkey, is arguing that what we've seen is, and so far, is an authoritarian regime and centered on an authoritarian personality. But if there's a yes vote on the referendum, this could take us to a totalitarian regime, which is really, really concerning.
And he's been, the President Erdogan has been getting into a lot of conflict in some of the European countries where there are Turkish citizens living, largely many of them who have gone there as refugees. And he's campaigning in these countries. What's been the problem with these kinds of campaigns? Because it's flared up quite a few conflicts and spats back and forth between Ankara and several European cities. Tell us more about that.
First of all, it is important to remind our audience of the fact that there are hundreds of thousands of Turks or Turkish nationals living in Europe. It's actually a few million, and many of them are in Germany. They've been living there for decades. They're part of European societies, but they also have a Turkish nationality. And many of these people are going to vote during this referendum. the problem for Erdogan is that he's dealing with is a very divided and polarized society. Recently, he's been able to gather the support of the Nationalist Party, but even nationalists are dividing among themselves as to whether or not they should vote yes or no. So Erdogan used these discursive clashes with European states and their high-ranking politicians to gain more nationalist support, to appeal to the nationalists in Turkey and in Europe, at the same time consolidate his power base. We heard him referring to some of the states in Europe as fascist, some politicians as fascists. They refer to these states as remnants of fascism and Nazism. These are very sensitive issues for a number of reasons, historical, political, social reasons in these European countries. And of course, these attacks were not taken well. Greeted well by European states. There was a reaction, a strong reaction coming from, for example, the president of Germany, from the prime minister of Germany, again, Dutch politicians, etc., etc. So, but I think it has been a very effective tactic used by Erdogan to appeal to the nationalist vote, to the nationalist parts of Turkish society, both in Turkey and within the European Union. But at the same time, this has led to significant damage with regard to the relationship Turkey has enjoyed with the European Union for a long time.
Baris, at one point, Erdogan actually called out the Dutch and the German governments and calling them Nazis. What agitated him to make this comment?
Well, a number of high-ranking Turkish politicians, including ministers, wanted to hold rallies on European soil and ask for a yes vote from the Turkish electorate living in those countries. And the German state and the Dutch state did not allow this to happen. And I think they administered this in a maybe problematic in a wrong way by playing into the hands of Erdogan, who was provoking a reaction from these governments, which strengthened his position on the referendum among the nationalist parts of the population. But the cause was the desire of Turkish politicians, including Erdogan, to hold rallies in European countries to ask for a yes vote on the referendum.
Right, and Baris, there's also been several incidences with Greece and Turkey. One about encroachment of airspace, of course, that famous incident that we had already talked about, which was about the trials that are going on in Turkey related to the coup.
Yes.
And of course, some of the people involved in the coup fleeing to Greece and claiming political exile there. And recently, there's been a few other developments. Tell us about relations with Greece and why they're being heightened at this moment.
Well, recently, as you mentioned, there's the issue of Greece Supreme Court refusing to extradite the 8 military officers who sought refuge after the coup d'etat attempt back in July 2016. Now, there are some clashes over, well, again, discursive clashes over territory in the Aegean Sea, and some of them relate to a number of small islands, but some of them are really, really small islands. You could even call them pieces of rock. And Turkey and Greece had a major clash over one of these islands back in 1996, and this brought the two countries on the brink of a war. So these are actually non-issues. These were been settled a long time ago, although Turkey still claims that, some of these settlements were unfair. But for a long time, there were no such clashes. The reason, again, why these are happening right now is that Erdogan wants to create external enemies so that he can consolidate and increase and consolidate his power base within Turkey and outside of Turkey.
And Rex
Yes.
Tillerson's visit to Turkey this week, what's on the agenda?
Well, I think they will be talking about Syria and Turkish presence in Syria. But one of the critical issues there is the role that will be played by Kurds, both in Syria and Iraq, in the near future. So Turkey, again, considers the PYD and its armed forces, who have been controlling as part of northern Syria for some time, as terrorists. Where at the same time, both Americans and now the Russians are open to their cooperation in their efforts against ISIS, or in both countries. But Turkey is adamantly opposed to the participation of Kurdish forces, but particularly PYD, in these processes. So I think this will be the most important issue on the table.
All right, Baris, I thank you so much, and we'll be keeping an eye on this, and if there's any other developments as a result of Rex Tillerson's visit to Turkey, we'll be back to you. I hope you can join us then. Thank you so much.
It was my pleasure.
And thank you for joining me here on the Real News Network.